The cry of trumpets cuts through the fog. The ground trembles under the steps of thousands of people. The air smells of iron and sweat. Before a wall of gleaming shields, a thin line of soldiers, each holding a strange spear in hand. It looks clumsy, too long, with a narrow iron shaft and a heavy tip. But it was this weapon, according to the ancient historian Polybius, that decided the outcome of battles. One moment, one throw, and the enemy turned into a helpless mass. Why could one spear stop an entire army? Why did Rome's adversaries fear not the gladius, not the cavalry, but precisely this, the PILUM? And what was hidden within it that changed the very concept of warfare? Legionaries didn't just throw the PILUM, they unleashed lightning, literally piercing through walls of shields. When the heavy iron plunged into the wood, the tip bent, getting irrevocably stuck. The shield became useless. It could neither be lifted nor thrown without exposing the body to attack. This is why the Romans called the PILUM not just a spear, but a decisive blow, the moment when the enemy's formation turned into chaos. This steel arrow weighed about 3 kilograms and could penetrate up to 3 layers of leather and wood. Polybius wrote that the PILUM tore through even Greek shields made of oak and bronze. But it wasn't only its power that made it fearsome. Its design was thought out to the smallest detail. The iron shaft, almost a meter long, easily bent after impact, so the enemy could not throw it back. This effect was called ingenium, the cunning of the weapon. Imagine a formation of Gauls approaches the legion. Their cries merge into a roar, and suddenly there's a whistle in the air. Dozens of heavy pila fly in an arc. A moment later, the front ranks lose their shields. The formation breaks, and it is precisely then that the Romans draw their gladii. The pilum didn't just kill, it deprived the enemy of protection and the will to fight. This was the philosophy of Roman warfare. To break order, not just bodies. The legionaries themselves called this moment the second wind of battle. After throwing the pilum, they felt a surge of confidence. They knew that the enemy was now blinded and defenseless. Archaeologists found hundreds of bent iron shafts at battle sites, like lightning bolts frozen in the earth. Each of them, a trace of the moment when discipline and calculation transformed chaos into victory. But the pilum was not always like this. Its origin was not from the workshops of Rome, but from the depths of Italic tribes. At one time, this weapon looked different, and its journey from a simple spear to a strategic instrument of war became a reflection of how Rome itself learned to conquer. It is here that the story begins, where metal and intellect merged into one, creating not just a weapon, but a symbol of power over the world. Long before the triumphs of Caesar and the brilliant legions of Augustus, when Rome was still only an alliance of warlike tribes, the weapon of a Roman resembled the simple spear of neighboring peoples. Then it was called a hasta, a light, straight polearm, with which they stabbed rather than threw. But everything changed when the Romans encountered the Etruscans and Samnites, peoples who mastered the art of projectile combat. They understood. War was not only the strength of the hand, but also the engineering of thought. It was from this clash that the pilum was born, a spear created not for beauty, but for destroying order in the enemy's ranks. Initially, the pilum consisted of a wooden shaft about 2 meters long and a thin iron rod which occupied almost a third of that length. The tip was narrow with a rhomboid point. But the main secret was not the blade, but the soft iron. After impact, the rod bent like pliable wood in the wind. This flaw was a brilliant calculation. The enemy, having pulled out the spear, could not use it again. It lost its shape, turning into a useless piece of iron. This was the logic of Roman warfare, not to give the enemy the opportunity to respond with the same weapon. Such a combination of hardness and flexibility was called ferrum molli, soft metal. Modern archaeologists found pila where the rod was deliberately made from 2 types of iron, hard at the base and soft near the tip. This was the work not of artisans but of engineers in military uniform. Every detail had its meaning: length, angle, even the weight balance between steel and wood. A Roman centurion ensured that the spears were identical, otherwise the formation of the throw would be disrupted. For the legionaries, this was not just discipline, it was the mathematics of death. The throw of the pilum itself required precision. It could not be thrown like a simple spear, too heavy a shaft, too delicate a balance. Legionaries trained for years so that the pilum would fly in an ideal arc and plunge in at the right angle. This skill was called ars iascendi, the art of throwing. Every soldier had to throw the spear synchronously at the centurion's command. When the entire cohort unleashed pila simultaneously, an iron rain seemed to be born over the battlefield. Polybius wrote that this moment was decisive. The enemy lost balance even before swords clashed. Archaeological excavations near Telamon and Numantia show hundreds of pila stuck in bones and shields. The metal is bent, the tips flattened, silent witnesses to engineering precision and ruthless calculation. One throw, and the formation of Gauls shattered, as if a lightning strike had pierced their line. Not because the pilum pierced bodies, but because it broke the very structure of combat. The Romans knew, battles are won not by muscles, but by formation. And the pilum was the tool that turned any enemy order into chaos. It is believed that it was during the Samnite Wars around the 4th century BC that the pilum first became the main weapon of heavy infantry. At that time, soldiers with rectangular shields and massive spears appeared, the principes. These warriors stood in the second line of the legion and threw pila before engaging in hand-to-hand combat. Their strike prepared the way for the advanced hastati, and behind them moved the veterans, the triarii. Thus, the Roman formation transformed into a living mechanism, where each phase of battle had its own weapon, its own function, and its own moment. Tacitus wrote that a legionary had to be part of a machine, not an individual warrior. The pilum embodied this philosophy. It did not require the strength of Hercules, but demanded absolute obedience. One throw, one command, one result. Rome's tactical genius lay not in inventing the spear itself, but in transforming it into an element of a system. Gradually, the pilum became not just a weapon, but a symbol of Roman discipline itself. Its form hardly changed for centuries, only the tip was made heavier, the balance improved, and lead inserts were added to increase its penetrating power. By the late Republic, the pilum already weighed about 4 kilograms and could penetrate not only a shield, but also a cuirass. Caesar wrote that it was the throwing of pila that determined the success of the legions against the Gauls, as the enemy lost formation even before the clash. But there was one secret rarely spoken of. The pilum, like Rome itself, was born not of victories but of defeats. Its form and functions are the result of mistakes that cost the Romans entire armies. To understand why this weapon became ideal, one must return to the moment when the legions first encountered an enemy against whom a normal spear proved useless. It was this defeat that forced Rome to recreate its weaponry, and along with it, its military thinking. The 3rd century BC. Southern Italy is engulfed in war. A man whom the ancients called the Eagle of Epirus, Pyrrhus, invaded the peninsula. His phalanx, trained in the Macedonian style, marched like a single monster, covered in bronze spears. The Romans first encountered the Greek formation, a wall of sarissas, pikes up to 6 meters long. Their light spears bounced off the tightly packed ranks helplessly. Hundreds of legionaries fell, without even reaching a sword strike. These defeats shook the Senate. According to Livy, it was then that the Romans realized, if they did not change their weapons, they would disappear. Thus began an era of reform. The old hasti were replaced with a new type of spear, heavy with a narrow shaft, capable of piercing a Greek shield. It was in these years that the pilum became a symbol of Roman ingenuity. It was created as a response to the sarissa, as a counterstrike against the phalanx. But its strength lay not only in its armor-piercing capability. The main thing was that it broke the enemy's formation. One throw, and the long phalanx, where everything relies on the mutual support of spears, disintegrated. A shield pierced by a PILUM pulled the arm down, unbalanced the soldier, exposing neighbors. This was the first time that engineering surpassed tradition. Polybius wrote that the Romans conquered not with bodies, but with minds. They understood that they did not need to imitate Alexander. They needed to break the very idea of his army. The PILUM became the key that allowed a small city on the Tiber to defeat the Hellenistic kings. A peculiarity of the PILUM during the Pyrrhic Wars was its length, up to 2 meters and 20 centimeters. The tip, made of soft iron, was secured with a bronze nail. After impact, it bent and sometimes broke, leaving the enemy with a useless shield. There was a hidden economy in this. The PILUM could not be reused, but its production was cheap and fast. A legion could replenish supplies right on the march. This corresponded to the Roman idea of logistica, the art of keeping an army in motion. As Rome conquered, the PILUM evolved. During the Punic Wars, when the legions clashed with Hannibal, the spear's design changed again. Carthaginian cavalry and light infantry acted swiftly, so the PILUM had to become even deadlier. That's when a lead weight appeared at the base of the shaft. It made the throw heavier, increasing its penetrating power. Such a PILUM weighed up to 4.5 kilograms. It was thrown from a distance of about 20 meters, and the impact was so powerful that the tip could penetrate not only a shield, but also 2 bodies in a row. Modern experiments by archaeologists from Oxford showed that when thrown at a 30-degree angle, a PILUM is capable of penetrating a 5-centimeter thick pine board and remaining bent within it. This physics of destruction, thought out, not accidental. Even the shape of the tip worked like a wedge, tearing through wood fibers. Thus, the weapon became an extension of thought, not just of the hand. Legionnaires armed with pila operated according to a clear scheme. Before the attack, the centurion gave a signal, the metallic roar of the tuba. The front line took 2 steps forward, lowered their spears at a slight angle, and threw them simultaneously. After the throw, the soldiers immediately drew their gladii and advanced, without stopping. Everything was calculated to the instant. This was not the chaos of battle, but a ritual of precision. Each throw opened the way for the next. The field after the throwing of pila looked like a scene of destruction. Shields pinned to bodies, bent shafts dripping blood, and the heavy smell of iron in the air. Even surviving enemies often threw down their weapons, not out of fear, but because they could no longer hold them in their hands. It was this effect, demoralization through technique, that became the hallmark of Roman wars. The PILUM transformed battle from a duel into a system. Where heroes once decided outcomes, now mechanisms triumphed. Every legion was like a machine, with thousands of identical movements, and this machine began its path to greatness on fields where the Romans first learned to fear and understand the enemy. But after victories over the Hellenistic world, Rome faced a new adversary, the barbarian. He did not form a phalanx and did not hide behind bronze. He advanced on the Romans in a wave, with shouts, without order, without fear. And here the PILUM showed the second side of its nature, not just a weapon of engineering, but a weapon of psychology. In the clash with chaos, it became an instrument of intimidation, a tool that broke the will even before the battle began. North. Cold land, thick fogs, heavy air before a storm. On the horizon, a dark mass of barbarian tribes, Cimbri, Teutons, Germanic peoples. They know no formation, wear no armor, shout hoarsely, clang their shields. In the eyes of the legionaries, not fear, but concentration. Before them is not a phalanx and not cavalry, but an avalanche. And everything is decided at the moment when the centurion raises his hand and a short, hoarse command rings out. In the air is born what the enemies called iron rain. Tens of thousands of PILUM soar into the sky and fall, as if fate itself had hurled them down. The barbarians break formation even before the clash, and the ground fills with the clang of metal, shouts, and the shattering of shields. In this moment, not just the power of the weapon is revealed, but the power of Roman order. The very word legion, from legere, to gather, and the PILUM, its first note, the signal for the mechanical annihilation of chaos. Every soldier knows, after the throw, a step forward, not a moment's pause. This training is brought to automation. Plutarch wrote that it was in clashes with the Germanic peoples that the Romans perfected the art of throwing the PILUM. No formation in the world could withstand simultaneously the impact of metal and the rhythm of discipline. The main protagonist of this transformation was the man who changed the fate of the Roman army, Gaius Marius. His reforms at the end of the 2nd century BC made the legion a universal combat machine. He abolished the property qualification, allowing the poorest citizens to serve, thereby increasing the army many times over. But along with that, he also changed the weaponry. Now each soldier had 2 PILUM, a light one and a heavy one. The heavy one was thrown first to penetrate the shield, the light one afterward to finish off and disrupt the formation. Both were equipped with a special tip attachment mechanism. A wooden peg replaced the iron one so that the tip would break upon impact, depriving the enemy of the ability to return the weapon. This solution, simple and ingenious, became the quintessence of Marius's reform, to break the enemy not only physically, but also intellectually. Archaeologists found PILUM from Marius's time in Gaul and Spain. Some had weighted shafts with soldered lead cores for additional kinetic force. The weight reached 5 kilograms. At a distance of 30 paces, such a spear could penetrate not only an oak shield, but also the person standing behind it. Experiments by modern reenactors confirm the impact of a PILUM created energy of up to 35,000 joules, almost like a musket shot. And all this without gunpowder, without mechanisms, solely due to the strength of the human hand and precise calculation of the center of gravity. Combat tactics also changed. Now the PILUM became not preparation for a clash, but the first strike in a whole symphony of death. When the first ranks of barbarians fell, the legion did not rush forward. It walked. Slowly, coherently, like a wave of stone. Each PILUM throw was not just an action, but part of a ritual. Legionnaires called this moment ictus, the blow. The centurion gave the signal, and the spears flew. The earth trembled, the air filled with whistling. The Roman machine worked without emotion, coldly, precisely, without heroism, without shouting. Contemporaries said that after Marius, even the sound of the PILUM became a symbol of fear. Barbarians began to lose their composure upon hearing the whistling of the iron tips. They knew, after this whistle would come silence, and in it, death would begin. The Romans used this psychological effect as a weapon. The PILUM became not only a physical but also a moral destroyer. Over time, this weapon became part of Roman identity. Veterans kept PILUM tips as talismans. In inscriptions on legionaries' tombstones, archaeologists find phrases like "Eaculator fortis," strong thrower. For a Roman, the PILUM was what a rifle is for a modern soldier, an extension of personality, a symbol of professional honor. But along with greatness, Marius's reforms also brought a new problem. A legionary armed with a PILUM became indispensable and thus dangerous to the Republic itself. The army, which once belonged to the Senate, was now loyal to its generals, and the PILUM was not only an instrument of victories, but also the beginning of the breakdown of the old order. For those who threw it at enemies would soon throw it against their own. When the banner inscribed SPQR first rose over the fields of Gaul, the PILUM was no longer just a weapon. It became a metaphor for the empire, heavy, flexible, relentless. And the further the legions marched, the the more the PILUM transformed into a symbol of Rome's very idea: order against chaos, system against passion. But in this ideal machine, as in every weapon, a moment ripens when it turns against its creator. When Gaius Julius Caesar appeared on the stage of history in the mid-1st century BC, the pilum was no longer merely part of the legionaries' equipment. It was the language of war that Rome spoke to the entire world. Caesar did not reinvent it. He used it like a surgeon's scalpel, turning the throwing of the spear into an act of ingenious precision. In his commentaries on the Gallic War, there are scenes where the outcome of an entire battle is decided by a single command: to throw the pila. He writes that legionaries threw them in a single moment without losing formation, with the calculation that the blow would strike the face and shield of the enemy simultaneously. This is not just tactics, it is the art of mass killing transformed into geometry. In the Gallic campaign, Roman legions fought against tribes who lacked discipline but possessed courage. Their formation was dense but immobile. The pilum broke this advantage. One precise volley, and the heavy Gallic shields turned into traps. A shield pierced by iron instantly lost its center of gravity, and warriors, attempting to free themselves, exposed their chests. Caesar notes that the front ranks perished not from swords, but from despair. In this lies the entire philosophy of Roman warfare. The pilum left the enemy no choice. In those years, the weapon underwent another change. To facilitate logistics, the pilum became detachable. The tip was attached to the shaft using a socket fixed with a pin. This allowed spears to be transported in parts and assembled right before battle. This system was called pilum duplex, double pilum. A soldier could now replace a bent shaft without a blacksmith. Rome turned even its weaponry into a form of time management. Everything had to work without stopping, like the empire itself. The weight of a standard pilum from Caesar's era was about 4 kilograms, and its length was slightly over 2 meters. The throwing distance was 25 paces, but experienced warriors could throw it from 30. The tip was finger-thick and ended in a point designed to pierce not only a shield, but also chainmail armor. The metal at the base was denser to give the weapon the necessary moment of inertia. Archaeologists in Alesia found dozens of pila stuck in the fortification walls, traces of night assaults when legions under Caesar's command besieged Vercingetorix. The scene at Alesia was the pinnacle of war's engineering theater. When the Gauls attempted a breakthrough, Caesar ordered the legionaries to throw their pila not forward but upward, so they would fall onto the enemy's heads at an angle. This decision saved the formation. The overhead strike broke shields, and the soft iron tips got stuck in the wood, rendering the defense useless. After this maneuver, Caesar first employed double throwing, ordering the rear ranks to unleash a second volley over the first. The entire valley turned into a metallic rain, and it was then that the Gallic army faltered. Polybius wrote that the Romans fight not for glory, but so that order may prevail. This phrase seems to have been written about the pilum. Each throw was an act of rationality against chaos. A legionary did not choose the target. He was part of a general system where every angle, every distance was calculated. Modern military historians call this principle controlled synchronization, an ancient form of networked combat. When thousands of pila fly simultaneously, the enemy does not see individual warriors. They see a wall of death. After the conquest of Gaul, the pilum became a symbol not only of the army, but also of power. Caesar personally rewarded legionaries who threw their spear first. For him, it was a sign of initiative, a moment when man and machine coincided. Romans even minted images of pila on coins as a reminder that the empire's strength began with a projectile strike. However, time passed. The army, accustomed to easy victories, began to change. Under Augustus, the pilum became shorter, lighter. Now it was more important not to penetrate, but to hold the line. The centurion ensured that every legionary could throw the spear with one hand without losing control of the shield. Combat became not a storm, but a procession of precision. The empire no longer fought for survival, it fought for order. But the stronger this order became, the more cracks appeared within it. The metal, created to bend, became a symbol of the empire's flexibility and its vulnerability. The PILUM, an instrument of destruction, now turned into a mirror of Rome. For everything that bends eventually breaks, and that day was already close when the shaft, thrown from a Roman's hand, would strike not a barbarian, but another Roman. The beginning of the empire's end was quiet, almost imperceptible, like a crack in bronze that only a blacksmith sees. In late antiquity, as Rome weakened from internal wars and the decay of discipline, the pilum gradually disappeared from the arsenal, not because it became worse, but because the world changed. Barbarians no longer marched in dense ranks. They attacked in waves, stealthily, suddenly. The empire needed close combat weapons, not projectile geometry. Yet, when archaeologists find bent iron shafts in 4th century strata, one can read an entire era through them. How man once subjugated chaos and created order from metal. Now the pilum became a symbol of past might, almost a ritual object. On Roman tombstones of that time, it was depicted not as a weapon, but as a sign of belonging to the past. Soldiers of the Eastern Roman army, already speaking Greek, still called the spear pilon, although they used completely different models. Thus, language preserved memory, while the steel itself was silent. Tacitus wrote that empires perish not from swords, but from the loss of the meaning of their weapons. This is precisely what happened. The pilum ceased to be part of the system for which it was created, but even in its disappearance it left a trace. The design of the Roman pilum became the prototype for medieval javelins and spears, and the principle of soft metal on the tip, a direct ancestor of engineering solutions applied even in modern weaponry. The idea of destroying defenses not by force but by cunning became the foundation of military thought. In this sense, the pilum did not die. It merely dissolved into history, like a formula that is no longer named but continues to be used. Historians debate how many centuries this weapon existed. Some claim about 7 centuries, others that the last pilum was thrown at the Battle of Adrianople. But what is more important is not the date, but the legacy. It remained in the memory of how ingenuity transformed the craft of killing into a system that millions of people believed in. The pilum was not just iron, it was the idea of Rome, its mathematics, its will. And now, knowing this entire history, one question remains. In each of us, living in a world of technology and systems, there is a drop of this Roman calculation, this rigid certainty that order is stronger than chaos. But if you stood on the field, amidst the clang of shields and the roar of battle, would you be able to raise your hand and throw your pilum, knowing that the fate of an entire army depended on your throw? Or, as thousands of years ago, would you be blinded by the same fear before which even metal bent?